and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. And last, but certainly not least, if you're interested in extra content on querying and publishing that's only for our members, please consider joining the Literary Prospects Patreon at patreon.com/literary prospects. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Jon Hickey earned his MFA at Cornell University and was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. His debut novel, Big Chief, named a most anticipated book of 2025 by the Washington Post, Debutiful, San Francisco Chronicle, Los Angeles Times, and LitHub, is out now. Jon has received scholarships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Sewanee Writers Conference, and he's an enrolled member of the Luc de Flambeau Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. His short fiction has appeared in Massachusetts Review, Gulf Coast Online, Virginia Quarterly Review, Meridian, and the Madison Review. Jon lives in San Francisco with his wife and 2 sons. Jon Hickey, thank you so much for being here to discuss your acclaimed debut novel, Big Chief. The Washington Post says Big Chief is a sly debut about drama in Native American politics. Hickey is so sure-footed that I'll follow wherever he goes. The San Francisco Chronicle says propulsive, a masterclass. Big Chief is a dazzling, fast-paced pressure cooker journey about not letting others define who we are. The New York Times says unexpected, disturbingly funny, the sort of work that beckons genuine talent with the promise of more to come. New York Magazine says a blistering work. And one more, the Los Angeles Review of Books says Hickey's depiction of the reality of reservation life eschews stereotypes and caricatures in favor of complex, multifaceted people. Big Chief understands the unique double consciousness of what it means to be Native American, the political workings of a tribe, the meaning of belonging under Indian law. But the novel is smart enough to keep all these ideas swirling, using them as the backdrop for an engrossing political thriller.
Wow.
So, with all of that, and I could have gone on.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about Big Chief? How do you describe the book?
I describe Big Chief as a spiritual journey by politics, I suppose. It's 9 years of my life put into this story of one fateful election weekend. I think that what really stands out to me is that how much of a spiritual journey it became, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I hope people are taking away from the book.
What was the spark that kind of got the story started for you 9 years ago?
9 years ago, 9 years ago was 2016, there was an election going on. I think I remember when I started it, the politics of the country were cartoonish, kind of circus-like, but it hadn't reached that sort of serious inflection point. I don't really feel like. But what it resembled to me was stuff that I'd seen on reservations around like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and beyond. The way that elections are conducted on reservations. They're small scale. There's a lot at stake, but it's not a lot of voters, so everybody kind of knows each other. There's a sort of personal aspect to it that I've been interested in a long time, but I don't think I really found the vehicle until I started writing about it in 2016. Um, and I always put in there that my son was born in 2016,
Oh, wow.
so I think I had a lot of questions about legacy and about belongingness. My son, my two sons now,
Mhm.
are members of the tribe, the Lac du Flambeau Band of Chippewa Indians up in northern Wisconsin.
Mhm.
But I was aware and concerned that they wouldn't have the same connection that I have with the reservation,
Mhm.
because we live in San Francisco. So that was on my mind as well. So the swirling political circus of 2016 plus, um, just thoughts about where our connection to the reservation, where that's going.
Yeah. The inner workings of tribal politics is probably not a subject that many readers will have extensive experience
Right.
with. And it
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
complicated. There's a lot to explain. And
Yeah.
yet, the story is extremely propulsive. We
Mhm.
heard it described as a political thriller. How did you figure out how to strike that balance between getting all of this necessary exposition and backstory to the readers without bogging down the narrative and keeping that propulsion and tension going?
It was tough. It was very tough. If you're not a political junkie, if you're not somebody who keeps up on that, I think the material can runs the risk of becoming dry a little bit. When we're getting really into the weeds about policies and governance, that sort of thing. When I was writing it, I had a few models in mind, some inspirations. The book is completely fictional, of course, but it took inspiration from events that were happening. So I think that my thought was that if I put enough of those real life events into one story, maybe we can keep the pace going.
Mhm.
Um, and I also think just the novel is told over the course of a weekend, so that's sort of the constriction of time seemed to make things a little bit more urgent, and um, I I was worried that maybe it was glossing over
Mm.
the material a little bit at times, but I've been on tour the last month or so, and I've had the privilege of running into people who do have firsthand experience with their respective tribal governments.
Mhm.
And whenever somebody introduces themselves as such, I'm like, oh, oh boy.
Here we
uh,
go.
yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I'm about to have it. And um, but people have been very supportive, and people have been like, some aspects of it are like scarily close to the real thing. So I take a little pride in that, I suppose. But yeah, it's listening to the characters and listening to the story, I think, and I've been really interested in it for such a long time, that you sort of become blind to maybe what's really exciting or what's really important. But I think that I was able to just focus on the things that were um, very necessary to the story itself.
Yeah. Was there any way that you sort of were able to, in revision, kind of trick yourself into looking at it like a new reader to figure out how to keep that? Because it is super propulsive. You've done it.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it. It's very good. Yeah, I that's what I was trying to do every round of revision, and there were many. There were a few. So it required something slightly different, like a slightly different take. So I would try various things. One of them was reading it out loud to myself.
Mhm.
The other thing, when that stopped working, I had the computer read it to me. like the
Yeah.
computer voice. This is a trick that I've learned from other writers that I know.
Mhm.
And we'll get the Word document or whatever word processor we're using, and we'll have the computer voice read it back, because the computer voice doesn't have the inflection. It doesn't know where to emphasize which words or which phrases. So
Mhm.
if it's not coming through in the words themselves, it probably won't come through in the voice. So I did that. Um, and I don't know, just various small tricks like that to try to see it brand new. But I mean, most of it for me, process wise, is listening to the sound of it,
Mm.
and I guess trying to find different ways that people will encounter these words and how they'll read them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about that you started out thinking about power
Mm-hmm.
in the book. Um, and it sort of turned into a book about belonging.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about exactly how that change happened, morphing into sort of starting out really talking about power and then moving into really belongingness?
I think, yeah, I think it was always about belonging. I think that was always the undertone,
Mm.
even as I conceived the idea. What I realized as I was writing it and I was revising it was that I had a character, Mitch, who's the narrator.
Mhm.
Um, he's the fixer, right? He's the second in command, the one that's pulling the strings.
Mhm.
But he's also somewhat estranged from the reservation. He doesn't have any family,
Mm.
or blood family. Um, so that this was this overwhelming need that he had. So I was starting to key in on what was he actually needing, and what was he doing to fulfill that need. And what he was doing was pursuing power. That he'd replaced this really important part of himself, this part that had left a void within himself, with the quest for power. That his belongingness was pegged to this idea that, if he's running the tribe, if he's important to the tribe in that way, that he belongs to this community, which is, I think at the beginning, it's pretty clear that that's maybe not the case. Maybe,
Mhm.
that he's still missing some very essential part of himself that he has to find. And yeah, and again, that was just, sort of listening to the character and observing the character, that um, it works for a time,
Mhm.
that pursuit of power and that replacement, but that power is corrupting.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's where we find him in the very beginning of the book. But yeah, it's just listening. It's just just sort of observing that, here he is. He has gotten what he wanted. I remember that being like a writing exercise once. Give your character exactly what they want. I don't think I was going off of that, but I mean, it just occurs to me that my character
Yeah.
has, something that he wanted. He got it, and now
Mhm.
he's unfulfilled, and then it becomes that story.
Yeah. You have said that in looking for inspiration for the structure
Mm-hmm.
of the novel that you came upon all the King's Men,
Yeah. Yes.
and that for maybe a year you didn't read anything but this book over and
Yeah.
over, sort of backwards and forwards. Can you talk about that process of taking such deep inspiration from another work and how that sort of manifested in your work and how that worked?
Oh yeah, I could go for a couple hours on this one.
Okay.
This one. I'll try not to. I'll try not to take up too much time, but I had a very deep affinity with the book "All the King's Men," and that was, the classic American political novel.
Mm.
Um, and I don't think it's read as much as it was back in the day.
Mhm.
But I think it's a very pertinent book right now
Mm.
in this moment. I wish more people would have read it. But there was an energy and a verve to that voice. Um, and it's about politics, but it's about much more than just politics. Politics is sort of the backdrop, and that's how I imagine Big Chief was going to go.
Mm.
That politics was going to be not the actual urgency of the thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I did read that a lot over and over and over again. Another one of my affinity novels is Invisible Man.
Mm.
And one of the reasons, by Ralph Ellison, and one of the reasons is because that's a book that wears its literary affinities on its sleeve,
Mhm.
and it points to these other literatures, and I always liked that. I always thought that if I'm going to write a book, I want my book to show where I've been in
Yeah.
my reading journey. So this book did start as a very close homage to All the King's Men,
Mhm.
but it had to become its own thing. The first draft of it was maybe more linear and took a longer time frame. I would
Mm.
say maybe a couple of decades.
Oh,
It was
wow.
a lot
Yeah.
longer. Yeah.
Wow.
Sort of charting the rise and fall of a young um, politician on a reservation. I handed that to my agent, and it was about 450 pages or something like that. 400. I don't know. Maybe I'm inflating. It felt like a lot. It felt like a big giant chunk of book. I handed it to her, and she liked it, but she was like, "It has to be shorter,
Mm.
and it has to be shorter by 25%."
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, all right, that's cutting about 100 plus pages, something like that. And what I ended up doing was cutting half of it
Wow.
because, yeah, that was a tough morning dealing with that one. Um, but what happened was that the entire novel ended up getting restructured around these interstitial chapters that I had that were taking place in a present time.
Mm.
And those chapters were taking place during the weekend before the election. And what I realized was that those were the chapters where there's urgency and there's
Mhm.
an actual story,
Mhm.
and things happening, right? Because
Mhm.
the other stuff was very backgroundy, um, and when that happened, I feel like Big Chief became its own book.
Mm.
Certain nods of the head to the All
Mhm.
the King's Men, certain gestures, just as reminders, um, Easter eggs, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like at a certain point, it can't just be a copy. It can't just be, a retelling, a straight retelling. It has to be its own thing.
Yeah. Did you always know that you wanted to deeply explore Mitch's spiritual journey? We've alluded to this spiritual journey a couple of times.
Yeah, yeah. Not in the outset. I didn't know. I don't think I knew exactly what the book was about, but I've
Mm.
been writing about. Yeah, my my family comes from the Lac du Flambeau Reservation up in northern Wisconsin, and but my grandparents were part of the relocation back in the 1950s.
Mhm.
So they moved after World War II. They moved to Chicago. So my mom was born in Chicago and grew up there, and we're a couple of generations removed from that everyday
Mhm.
reservation sort of life. I mean, we have I still have family up there. My parents just moved back, um, and we would always go back. We would always visit. I mean, we were in the area, so we would visit very regularly. Uh, and I always knew that I had a connection to that place. That place has
Mhm.
always meant something to me that I haven't been able to exactly articulate.
Mhm.
And I realized at a certain point that all my writing seems to be going back to that feeling of, how do you define that connection? How do
Mhm.
you articulate that connection? How does it exist within yourself? And how do you express it? How do you nurture it? How do you protect it? Those sorts of things. And I've been circling around that topic, as I've been trying to discover it in myself and try to, understand my own personal relationship with the community.
Mhm.
I've also been doing that through the writing. So it was always going to happen that way. I think it was this inevitability, but I just wasn't able to clearly see it. I think I tricked myself into writing it a little bit because it's hard. It's a tough thing. I live in San Francisco. It's very difficult for me to maintain that connection
Yeah.
with some regularity, and it can be a painful thing, that separation. And I don't like painful things. I don't like delving too far into
Yeah.
it. So I think that, when I found a subject like politics and a story like this,
Mhm.
it was my way of finding a way into talking about that. And the way that I put it just now just sounds like trickery. It's like I tricked my brain into, allowing myself to write about something that is very, very important and sometimes painful, but oftentimes joyous within me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have also said that Mac is one of your favorite characters
Yeah. Yeah.
in the whole book, and it didn't start out that way.
It certainly did not. No. He, yeah, he was a surprise. And he was always a character in the book. Um, I always feel weird about talking about like very, very early drafts of the book because some of those early drafts do not resemble this thing at all. But there are people like Mac who have always kind of been there. He was sort of in the background. He was um, I joke often that he's sort of a Fredo Corleone character,
Mm.
just somebody that people don't really take seriously, and kind of talks tough, and
Mhm.
but is maybe a little bit comical. And I hesitate to say something like comic relief, but it's akin to that sort of thing,
Yeah.
that he came in and said funny things and then sort of went back into the background. But what
Mhm.
happened was that every revision he just sort of insisted on a couple of more lines
Ah.
and a little bit more page time, until there was a fulcrum point where it was like, this guy's a main character.
Mm.
And I've been resisting that for some reason. I've been trying to kind of crowd him out, but he does not want to be left in the background for too long. So what happened was that, yeah, I realized that he was the president. He was the guy. And he has the personality. He's got the big personality. He's got the ambition,
Mhm.
and maybe some of the blind spots that allow him to
Mhm.
operate the way that he does. But yeah, he was a big surprise. But I just let him talk and just let him
Mm.
say what he was going to say, and what he had to say was often funny and sometimes menacing, and but never boring.
Nope.
Yeah.
Well, not in the final version.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, have you always been a writer?
I think about that. I was going back to when I was a kid. I don't remember putting down like stories, but the play that I would do, it was very dialogue
Hmm.
driven, I suppose, and story driven, and maybe based on books or TV shows, most likely TV shows. um, but my grandfather, who I did not really know, he was he wanted to be a writer. I think that he succeeded in having a writing lifestyle.
Mm.
So I remember when he died, we saw his apartment and he had this study with all the books, and he had a typewriter which I inherited, and um, yeah, I think that was my idea of what a writer was, and I'd always sort of thought, maybe I'll finish his books. Maybe I'll finish the work that he did. And like I said, I barely knew this person,
Mhm.
but there was like this sort of sense of legacy about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think I really started writing until college. I knew that I liked words. I knew that I liked books.
Mm.
I was really into Stephen King, and
Mm.
in my middle school years, and I
Mhm.
remember
Mhm.
reading those short stories and feeling like this is possible. Like this is
Mhm.
something that you can do, and but I don't think that I had the path until I ended up in college and MFA.
You got your MFA at Cornell, is
That's
that
right.
right? Which is a great program.
It is.
What was your MFA experience like?
It was a lot of trying stuff. It was a lot of experimentation, to kind of come back to where I started. I think there was a course called postmodern novels that I
Mhm.
think ruined a few of us for a couple of years, because all of a sudden, we were all, naming our characters weird names like Thomas Pynchon, and it just sort of palely imitating that sort of experimental postmodern sort of thing.
Mhm.
And I went to MFA very young, right after undergraduate, and a few of us did. So we were all like in our 20s. So I think that we were also learning how to be adults in the midst of writing these stories,
Mhm.
and novels or novel attempts. So that's what I remember it being, as just sort of this sort of frenzied sort of time of growing up and reading all kinds of books that I hadn't read before, and expanding my horizons that way, but
Yeah.
kind of coming back to the place that I started, I think. Yeah.
Wiser.
Wiser, yes. Wiser, a little bit more practice, that sort
Yeah.
of thing. But I don't know. I feel like my sensibilities were set earlier than that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
maybe they became sharper, yes.
Well, what then was the road to publication like for you? How did it work?
Um, it took a while. It took a while, and then when it happened very, very fast. And I'm still trying to piece it together. But I went to grad school. I went to Stanford on the Stegner Fellowship right
Mhm.
after grad school, and I was working on novels that just weren't working. So I wrote I want to say about three
Mm.
novels that
Mhm.
um, to the level of that really captured my need to finish them, I suppose.
Mm. Mhm.
um and so there was a lot of life that happened. I got married, and we had kids, and I was the stay-at-home dad for them as well.
Yeah.
And then I took my time on the novel.
Mm.
So when it was time to find an agent, and I met my agent at the Sewanee Writers Conference back in 2017,
Wow.
and we kept up a correspondence. She checked in every so often, and then in 2021, the book was ready to go out to her, and she took it, and then we revised it again, maybe about another year and a half,
Mm.
and then we sent it out to a bunch of editors, and we got response right away. So this is what I mean by it happened very, very fast.
Yeah.
It felt like when we submitted it, the editor who took it, Tim O'Connell at Simon and Schuster, he was very effusive. He wrote a very effusive, expletive laden email. Good expletives. But he'd read it in a day, and a couple other editors had read it within a day. So it was surprising how fast that process went.
Wow.
And yeah, and 2 years later it came out.
Do you find that you mentioned 9 years of work on your debut novel, which is not your
Yeah.
first novel, but
Right. Yeah.
do you find that your process has changed now that you have published a debut
Mm-hmm.
and you're now working on, I would assume, another novel towards publication?
Yeah, it's hard to say right now. I do have a project in the works. It's in the early stages.
Mm.
I'm pretty certain I see where it's going.
Mm.
Um, I'm leaving it open,
Yeah.
so I haven't, between all the like this last year has been all like promo and getting the final touches on the last one and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So I haven't really had time to sit down and really immerse myself back into the process of just pure writing, just generating pages and editing them. But I think that, yeah, going through the process of summing up the novel over and over again,
Yeah.
there's that. It's sharpened and clarified how I understand the novel
Mm.
and how to communicate that with somebody else. It was very comfortable when it was up here,
Yeah.
up in the head, and I knew that it was about all of these things. And then, in order to convince somebody to read it, you have to put it into kind of a box, a kind of package, so that it's understandable. So I think that process has gone, has sped up a little bit. So
Mhm.
I have my elevator pitch for the novel, which I will not be sharing.
Yeah, it's
Um, but I do
okay.
have it. I do have it. Like, so I think in that sense, like I've operated for years upon years, um, without thinking about the market. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for better or worse, because this is my first experience with putting a book out there,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of things that I did not know, and I feel like maybe I should have known, like if I've been
Mm.
around writing for this amount of time. Um, but yeah, that I really think that getting a book together and having it reach as many readers as possible, it's negotiating that mixture of the art and the commerce, and it's a really strange place to be, and not a debate that I know a whole lot about. But when we were revising Big Chief, there are certain compromises, there are certain things that you feel like you have to do for a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm probably better at anticipating that a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
um, and while still maintaining some sort of integrity,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
I understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you know now that you feel like you should have known or that you wish you had known before publishing your debut?
Wow, that's a great question and a big question. What do I wish that I'd known, um, just the general idea that I'm not writing for myself. I know that sounds very basic, I think, but
It's not.
yeah, I mean, that was kind of a profound thing, and that's something that I'm learning right now as people are reading the book and telling me that they are. That this is this is a new sensation of people that I don't know, and people that are live far away from me in other states and other countries.
Mm.
That this is this book, um, a good part of this book lives in other people
Mm.
as they read it. And that's something that I never really thought about too much, as I was, in this office
Mhm.
writing the thing, all by myself, telling my kids that I have to go to work, and that sort of thing. But yeah, I guess, just that awareness that people are reading this and they're coming to it with their own stories, right?
Mhm.
They're filling out what I can't provide with their own thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a new thing for me.
Yeah. And a great point. I heard it described that this sort of idea I've heard described before as, each person that reads a book is reading a different story
Yeah.
because we're all
Isn't that
bringing,
amazing?
yeah, it really is. It
We
really
see
is.
different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a completely different book for each
Yeah.
person who reads it.
Our own references are personal, and we're meeting halfway.
Yeah.
And I'm learning this very acutely right now as I talk to people at the events and everything. But it's which is great. It's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing to let others into this world.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
I always I think I always settle on patience,
Mm,
and it's not. I don't think it's great advice necessarily. I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase it as advice. Like go learn to be patient. Because it's not something that you can just like learn how to do. You can't just pick up a book and all of a sudden become a patient person. It takes years, and it took me years. When I was in graduate school and when I was a Stegner fellow,
mhm,
I was very impatient for things to happen, and I was impatient for things to happen because I didn't know what I was doing
mhm,
afterwards. After the fellowship life, after grad school life,
mhm,
that
mhm,
real life,
mhm,
quote unquote, real life. Uh, so I was very impatient for to get a book out there in the world, which is not an advantageous place for the book. um, because you're writing the book for a different reason, other than creating this story. You're writing it to get a job,
mhm,
and I think that um, I was just very impatient with it. But what happened was life happened. I met my wife, and we built a life together, and I did other things, and I allowed the book to take as long as it needed to take. um, and again, that's not something I could have taught myself way back when.
mhm.
I don't think it would have been very comforting to say that to me at 30 years old. I was like, "Oh, you just got to be patient." I don't know how I'd react to that, but it's just the truth. It's just the truth. These things take as long as they take, and everybody's on their own writing journey. And don't compare yourself. Don't feel like you have to hit the milestone by 35, or 40. This book came out. I'm 44 right now,
Mm,
and I started my MFA when I was 23 years old,
mhm.
and that doesn't really mean anything. That's what I found.
Yeah,
It happens when it happens if you stay with it.
that is great advice.
All right, all right. I always feel like it's just never great. Like it never sounds great. When you're in the moment, you're like, oh yeah, be patient. And I'm like, I don't wanna. I want things to happen now.
But it is good advice. And it's good to hear that it can take time. I think it's always good for people to hear, if you haven't published a book in a year after you've started, that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, most certainly, most
Yeah.
certainly. I mean, and my time is not even the longest time.
Mm,
Like I know people that have taken a lot longer
mm,
with individual books, or just their career. They published their first book at 55,
mhm,
60, that sort of
mhm,
thing.
mhm.
So it's we all just it just happens when it happens,
Yeah. Yeah.
as long as you stick with it.
Patience.
Patience. Yes.
We have a traditional last question.
All right.
Podcast. And it is, when Big Chief is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh. That's a good, what a good question. The easiest answer, because I think in previous drafts, this was a thing Big Chief talks about. It hits a lot of themes. One of them being appropriation. One of them being, the visual, outward signs of things. Mac was really into the Mardi Gras music of the Mardi Gras Indians in New Orleans. So I think that the easiest answer to your question is Big Chief by Professor Longhair, or Big Chief by the Meters, most likely.
Great.
Yeah. It was simple. It was, yeah.
Big Chief, Big Chief.
Yeah. I had to go for the big, long explanation there. I was like, yeah, it's Big Chief, Professor Longhair. It's a good song, but it's also like that, brings into mind questions of appropriation. And
yeah.
I think I might have lost you there for a moment.
Oh, are we back?
Yep. I think we're back. Yes.
All right. Well, Jon Hickey, thank you so much for joining today. It has been a pleasure talking with you.
What a way to start the morning over here. It's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.